Mizuno is a brand that's best known for their leather football boots, but they have just released a new flagship synthetic model. And that's exactly what we have right here with the Alpha 2 Elites that are going to retail for $180. Now, the first Mizuno Alpha released last year, and I thought that it was a decent football boot that just struggled to set itself apart from the competition. So the question is, what changes have they made with this new model, and are these boots actually going to be worth your consideration? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into in this video. And of course, if you're interested in the Alpha 2s or any of the other boots that we discussed, you can find links to them on sale with discount codes in the description below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out. So now let's get things started with the design. Alright, so to kick things off with maybe what's the most noticeable change with the new Alpha 2 is that Mizuno have gone ahead and redesigned the upper. And for those who aren't familiar with the Alpha from Mizuno, essentially what you're going to be getting with this boot is a full synthetic, but it is going to be a woven upper that has this really slick coating to it. I think one of the best ways I could describe the feeling to this upper is that it almost has a laminated feeling to it, and you can almost see that it would have that feeling just because of how shiny and reflective the coating is. But the upper on the original Mizuno Alpha was also the similar woven design with the coated material, so what have they really changed? Well, the big thing that I noticed on Mizuno's website in the description for these boots is that they focused on making sure that the woven material here is going to stretch laterally, so along the sides of your foot, but it won't stretch along the length of your foot. Now, I'm not exactly sure what kind of material science, engineering, or design changes they would have made to get to that point, but clearly the idea that Mizuno is going for here is that these boots should be more accommodating for those with wider feet. And that definitely piqued my interest because I, like I know many of you watching, have slightly wider feet, especially towards that toe box area. And the upper itself feels really flexible to the touch, and it doesn't bunch up too much in any one area, and I really like that. Now, there's nothing too crazy to see with the lacing system. It's just going to be this traditional U-throat design that runs pretty deep all the way to the base of the toe box there, and it's going to allow you to have a lot of adjustability. The tongue itself is pretty minimal. Maybe my one complaint there is that it feels a little bit plasticky. That's a similar complaint that I had with the original Alpha model, but it seems to be what Mizuno is going for here. Now, moving towards the insoles and the inside of these boots, this is another big change that Mizuno has made. They have added their zero glide material all throughout these boots. So this is a coating that's not just on the insoles, but also all around the heel area and continuing down basically through the midfoot and towards the toe box. And that zero glide material that's on the insole and the inside of the upper, it is extremely sticky. I mean, it's pretty much on par with what you would find on the upper of the Phantom GX2s from Nike, that really sticky, almost adhesive-like material. That's what you're getting with the insides of these boots. It's literally just almost sticky to the touch. Now, the inside of the original Mizuno Alphas was also pretty sticky, so I think Mizuno was just kind of expanding upon that idea with the Alpha 2s, and clearly the reason they're doing it is similar to why we see grip socks becoming really popular on the market. They're just trying to create the idea, or maybe the implied idea, that there's going to be less slipping around inside the boots. And I'm going to be honest, I'm pretty indifferent when it comes to this sticky material that's on the insoles and inside the heel area around the boots. I just think that if you're getting a pair of boots that have the right fit, so if you've sized them correctly, they're not too big, they're not too small, and the shape of the boots is accommodating for your feet aren't really going to be sliding around in the boots no matter what the material is. You know, I've worn plenty of boots that are really comfortable that have a slick and soft inner liner that isn't sticky at all, and when I wear those boots, I never feel that my feet are sliding around inside of them. Now, that may just be my personal opinion, and keep in mind, I'm not a player that typically will wear grip socks, but if you are someone that is a big fan of grip socks and you like the idea of having a more adhesive effect inside the boots and your feet, you know, being really glued on, then you might actually like the sensation that you get with these. I would just argue again that the sizing and fit of your boots is far more important to ensuring that your feet aren't going to be sliding around. Now, in terms of cushioning that you get towards the heel area, Mizuno always does really well with pretty much all of their boots in this regard, and you do have just a subtle amount of padding, not maybe quite as much as you would get on some of the Morelia models, but it's definitely enough to provide some cushioning. And then moving over to the backside of these boots, you're going to have Mizuno's FG outsole, and this is actually going to be, I think by a decent margin, the most aggressive FG outsole that Mizuno has on any of their boots. Just for the sake of comparison, you can see the FG outsole that they have on the Morelia Neo 4 Beta here is actually pretty simple. Although the outsole itself is quite rigid, you just have these conical studs towards the forefoot and around the heel. Whereas with the FG outsole on the Alpha 2s here, you have these triangular studs that are actually more sharp and aggressive than you may think. They have a really defined edge to them that's going to do a great job at biting into firm ground surfaces. And then the sole plate here is going to be pretty much as rigid as Mizuno makes them. You're going to get a little bit of spring towards the toe box, but along the midfoot, it's going to be extremely solid. It's always a give and take situation when it comes to the flexibility of sole plates. Sometimes I like to have a little bit more bend in the midfoot, but these, you could maybe make the argument that you get more of a snappy effect with that added rigidity. It's just going to come down to personal preference. And then another thing that's good to know is that if you are a player that happens to play on artificial grass more often than you play on firm ground natural grass, you can get the same version of the Mizuno Alpha 2s with an AG sole plate. And those AG versions of the boots are going to be pretty much identical, with the only difference being that instead of these sharp triangular studs here, you're going to have a conical stud layout. Next up, let's move on to the fit and feel. So I'll be honest, I was a little bit skeptical when I was getting these out of the box and trying them on for the first time, because I was somewhat let down by the fit of the new Mizuno Alpha when it was released last year. I especially thought they were just a little bit too narrow towards the front of the boots. But I actually feel that whatever small adjustments Mizuno made in the design and the structure of the upper of these boots actually made a difference in terms of making them a little bit more accommodating for wider foot shapes. In fact, in terms of overall width, I felt that these were pretty much on par with the Neo 4 Betas that I've had for quite a while now, and I definitely think that they're slightly wider than the average speed boot. And I'm not quite certain if you're just getting more volume in the toe box or you're getting more stretch from the upper. That's just something that we would have to ask one of the engineers or designers at Mizuno. Now, when it comes to the heel area and lockdown, this is something I've never had a problem with on any Mizuno model, and the Alpha 2s here are no exception. You get a ton of security all the way from the ankle to the back of the boots. Now, in terms of length and sizing, you'll want to pay attention here because the Mizuno Alpha 2s are going to run a little bit long, very similar to the Neo 4 Betas here, which also run a little bit long. I got these in my standard size 10.5 US, and I'd say I found there to be around a ½ centimeter or so extra space than what I would normally have on a size 10.5. That being said, even though I felt they ran a little bit long, I still had great security in these boots, and I still felt a lot of sensitivity on the ball. So for that reason, I would say if you're someone who usually appreciates a slightly roomier feel with a little bit of space at the end of the boots, I would probably recommend going true to size. But if you want a closer fit with a little bit more sensitivity and you're a player who really likes having their toes up at the end of the boots, I'd definitely say go a half size down. Now, one funny thing I wanted to point out about these boots is that adjusting the laces on them was actually a little bit annoying at first. It's something I noticed on the previous model as well. Because you have that really sticky material on the inner lining of the upper, just pulling the laces through the lace holes of the boots, especially throughout the length when you get towards the toe box, can be a little bit annoying and finicky, but it actually creates a slight benefit as well. Because what I noticed when lacing up these boots is that I could intentionally leave a decent amount of slack towards the base of the toe box area here, pretty much around halfway down the length of the lacing system, and then I could tighten them up towards the ankle, and then after I'd start walking around, the laces would actually stay in that configuration. So if you do want to have them a little bit looser towards the base of the toe box, you can definitely do that, and it will give you a slightly more accommodating feel when it comes to the fit. So all in all, the sticky Zero Glide inner liner is going to be a bit of an adjustment, especially if you're not used to it or haven't felt it before, but other than that, these boots feel really comfortable on feet. Let's talk about what they were like to play in. Now, for the most part, I feel that the improved design definitely carried over into improved performance, at least for me. And probably the biggest reason for that is ultimately just additional comfort that I got with having a little bit more freedom and flexibility in that toe box area. When it comes to the touch on the ball, I mean, these give you exactly what you would expect from a high-end speed boot. It's sharp, it's clean, and it's exactly what you would think you would get from a boot with an upper that's less than 1 millimeter thin. Now, keep in mind that the sensation you get from the Alpha 2s is going to be very sensitive. So you're going to feel everything. You're gonna feel the sting of the ball when you're shooting or passing, and you're also gonna feel the pain when someone else steps on your boots, but to be honest, that's gonna hurt no matter what you're wearing. What I'm trying to get at is that there's not really any padding on these boots, so if you're used to something that has a more cushioned or plush feel, like a thicker boot or a leather boot, that's not what you're gonna get with these boots. But if you like that barefoot sensation that a razor thin upper will get you, that is what you're gonna get with these. As I mentioned before, the upper here is not too sticky, so it's not gonna be like the Vapor 16 or the Phantom GX2 from Nike, but it's not quite as matte as the F50 Elite from Adidas. As far as stickiness, it's gonna be somewhere in between those two. And then the traction that you get from the sole plate is honestly pretty intense. And I was using these on artificial grass for my testing, and it was probably a little bit too intense for use on AG, so I would recommend getting this pair with this sole plate if you more exclusively play on firm ground natural grass. If you play on AG more often like I do, I would definitely look online for the artificial grass pair. It's just gonna give you a little bit less rotational traction and more freedom when it comes to making pivots. But if you do want something really aggressive for real grass, these are gonna do the job. Next up, let's talk value. As I mentioned at the start of the video, the Alpha Elite 2s are going to retail for $180 US. And that means that they are nearly half the price of the made in Japan versions, which are gonna retail for $320. Now, over the past couple years, having the chance to try on and see multiple different versions of Mizuno boots, some of which are the made in Japan ones and some of which are the Elite models, I've gotta say, it is quite hard to tell the difference, especially when you've got them on feet. Now, the Alpha 2 Elites that I have here are made in Vietnam, and I do think it's the case that sometimes you just pay a premium based on where the boots are made. Now, we definitely see this with the Copa Mundial from Adidas, which is one of the only boots they sell that's still made in Germany to this day, and the price of these is definitely slightly inflated because of that. And for that reason, I think the Alpha 2 Elites are gonna be amazing value at or around that $180 mark, especially when you consider that the top-end competitors from Nike and Adidas are gonna be closer to $260. With the Elites, it almost feels like you're just getting a top-end boot at a discount. And the Alpha 2 is one of 3 Elite models I have in my collection. I also have the Mizuno Morelia 2 Elite and the Neo 4 Beta Elite, and they are all great value. You can pick them up all between $160 and $180. Next up, let's get into the competition. Honestly, I find it's really tough talking about competition when it comes to some top-end speed boots because there are just so many great options on the market that usually what's going to be best for you will often come down to personal preference. So to start off, I think one great competitor would be the Nike Vapor 16 Pro, which is going to be the second tier takedown model because that boot is going to retail for $160, similar price point to the Alpha 2s. And because of the more slick upper you get on the Vapor 16 Pros, I actually prefer them to the Vapor 16 Elites, which I think are just a little bit too sticky. They're both amazing boots. If you're more a fan of that stretchy knit material that's running through the center of the upper, I'd probably recommend you going towards something like the Vapor 16 Pros, but if you want something with a slightly wider toe box, you're probably going to be better suited with the Alpha 2s. Now, similarly, I think another great comparison would be with the F50 models from Adidas, both the standard and the messy variation. And honestly, that's such a tough comparison because both the standard and the messy versions of the F50 are amazing football boots. They're both pretty accommodating for wide feet, similar to the Alpha 2s, and they both have great uppers as well. If I'm being really nitpicky, I like the design of the tongue on both the standard F50 and the messy version compared to the tongue that you get on the Alphas, and maybe I slightly prefer the texture of those uppers as well. But honestly, there's not much between the F50 and the Alpha 2 here. You probably have to try them both on just to see which works best for you. And then finally, what I think is maybe the most apt comparison for the Alpha 2, I have its competitor from inside the Mizuno brand, and that's the Morelia Neo 4 Beta Elite. Now, I actually took out the measuring tape earlier just to take note of the different dimensions between these two boots, and in terms of overall shape and length, they are pretty much identical. And not only are they identical in terms of shape, but they're also pretty much identical in terms of fit as well. I mean, even the stiffness and the flex of the sole plates is pretty similar. And for the longest time, if I would ever recommend a speed boot from Mizuno, I would actually push people towards the Neo 4 Beta, just because I think it was a little bit more premium and more comfortable than the original Alpha. But at this point with the new Alpha 2, I actually think that they're almost on the same level when it comes to feel. But that being said, if you want a more natural natural, soft, and slightly plush feel towards the toe box, I think it's going to be hard to beat the natural leather that you get in the Neo 4 betas. But if you want something a little bit more thin that will give you slightly more sensitivity and you don't mind the synthetic, then I'd probably push you towards checking out the Alpha 2s. But certainly as far as sizing is concerned, if you have tried on the Neo 4 betas in the past or any of these Neo models from Mizuno, whatever size you want on those, it's going to be the same with the Alphas. What are my final thoughts? Following the release of the original Mizuno Alpha, which I thought was just okay, it seems like Mizuno have actually made some tangible improvements with the new Alpha 2s that all are delivering a more comfortable fit. And for me, that means that these boots are moving in the right direction. I still think that the sticky inner liner is a little bit weird to get used to, but once you get these boots on feet, as far as comfort is concerned, they're going to be able to compete with pretty much any synthetic speed boot on the market. So I would definitely have them up there with the likes of the F50 from Adidas as well as the Furon from New Balance. And guys, that is going to do it for this video. Please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And also, if you've tried on these boots before, let me know what you think of them in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.